station. And then we do a lot of like outreach, outpatient behavioral health care, mental health services, substance use disorder treatment for people. We deliver that in a whole bunch of ways. That's not my bailiwick at PSC, but I feel pretty confident talking about it, so we'll talk about that if we can. How we got to where we are today, it's an important story. Try to do it quickly. So our oldest and original program was a large-scale congregate shelter. So think mats on the floor. We eventually evolved to bunk beds, but we're talking people right on top of each other, pitches apart. The goal was to get as many people inside as we could, because staying outside is potentially life-threatening night in, night out. This was also a different era when we opened in the late 70s, where we did not have the same amount of homelessness in our community. We did not see people sleeping by the sides of freeways and right in the street like you do now. Back then when we opened, but the goal was to prioritize people who other shelter services were working for. So there were a lot of programs that required people to make a hard 5 o'clock deadline for whatever reason. Some people couldn't. People that passed the breathalyzer would get in. Some people couldn't do that. You had to pay. You had to agree to pray in order to stay. Not passing judgment on any of those as a structure, but the true fact of the matter was there's a whole bunch of people who that didn't work for, and they stayed outside. Our goal was to bring those people inside. And so we tried to get as many people in as we could. I worked in that place. That's where I got my start at ESC. I am forever grateful to the untold thousands of lives that that program likely saved. It was a hard place to be. You were on top of people. It was high stress. You wait in line for your meal, next to somebody else who's also waiting in line for meal, covered in scattered rain, responding to hearing maybe voices. And it's a really high stress space. But inside, we've been thinking a lot as an organization about how can we evolve our shelter model, all the while knowing shelter is not the solution to homelessness. Housing is. We got into the housing game, which we'll talk a bit about as we move through our kind of organizational progression. But we still have a lot of shelter. Shelter is still critical to need it for people at the front door while you're working on a kind of a permanent housing solution. We're trying to think of like what can we do to create more space for people so people have more autonomy, that sort of thing. And then COVID-19 hit. And all of a sudden, we were instructed, as we all were, the first thing we need to do is socially distance and get away from people and create space and stay at home. And I had 250 people living in the shelter that I was operating with neither of those things, without risking complications for COVID. We worked with our county partners to move that entire program to a hotel in Renton, where we turned basically we spent a couple days what had been a almost actually at that point it was over 41 years where people have been sleeping there. We did the math on that. That's like 16,000 consecutive nights people have been sleeping in that program. Overnight, moved everybody to this hotel in Renton. And under the premise that the goal is to limit the spread of COVID, which happened. But what also happened was almost overnight people changed before our eyes. Our whole housing first philosophy is like people, it's not reasonable to expect people to pull themselves up by the vertical bootstraps or living out on the streets. So we shouldn't be surprised that we saw this kind of change in a hotel setting, but I was shocked by how quick it happened. And there are people we had known for decades, which is a tragic fact that people live in shelters sometimes, who were unrecognizable. That was a term actually our staff used the next day. My favorite anecdote was within a few days of staying in this program, organically a jogging group amongst people staying in the program propped up, and people started jogging with the idea of thinking about taking care of their health and physical well-being. That would have been laughably unheard of at a high-stress congregate dynamic like the old shelter. And so at that point, we're not going back. Naive of me, I thought we'd be down in Renton for like 6 weeks. We were there for 2.5 years, and we're all still wearing masks today, and I would. Pandemic persists, but we also said, regardless of the pandemic, we're not going back for so long. So we worked with our county partners to identify what sort of resources could there be to make this new non-congregate model permanent. And long story short, through countywide health housing programs, one of the things I came and talked about, there were many throughout the county, we were able to acquire 2 hotels, which are right nearby. The former Holiday Inn on 141st in Aurora has been open since October of last year, so it's a year now. That only had over half the people. The other program opened even closer. It's the former extended stay at 131st and Stone. That's called Healthy Housing Northgate. We're working on another name. That's been open now for about 5 weeks. And so we met with this group before both of those programs, but I want to, since we've been up and running for a minute, I wanted to come back and say, I can talk about what we do to be good neighbors. We have a whole bunch of things we ask of our clients. We have programming we use to try to ensure if there are issues in the neighborhood that not only can we trust them if they're related to us, but even if they're not, can we be a resource for you all in the broader neighborhood? It's homelessness is everywhere. Can we have some more friendly technicals out in the community? And we've been doing that. I'm interested to hear how it's going. And also, just to mention, another program actually came online that had been in the works for far longer than either of these two. I mentioned briefly we do housing. We develop our own housing. We don't just buy. It's nothing to do with the pandemic. We opened up another program right close to Mary Pilgrim 4 months ago called the North Star, and that is permanent apartments. It's low-income apartments and where people live and sign a lease. Whereas these programs I mentioned, Mary Pilgrim and Northgate, are the new version of shelter, right? Like this new way we think it's a better way of offering shelter to people, where people actually have a platform that privacy, some autonomy, and a more reasonable chance to recover compared to the old school model. So that was like super rapid fast. I wanted to level set to why I'm here, who am I, where I situate myself in all of this homelessness stuff in our community. And happy to talk further, but want to pause in case there are things people wanted to ask about on any topic whatsoever. Yes?
So we were private organization.
Yes.
How are you funded?
The question was, we're a private organization, and how are we funded? It's a combination of a lot of different things. Overwhelmingly, some combination of government funding, some private philanthropy, and a lot of private insurance, private insurance, healthcare insurance. A lot of our clients receive Medicaid, and that's a payer for a lot of services. The programs in your neck of the woods right here that we're talking about are the two that are most prominent. Are this county-wide health and housing initiative, which you might have heard about. It was actually passed by our county council before the pandemic, which allows 1/10 of 1% of the sales tax to go towards acquiring or delivering services to people experiencing chronic homelessness, with the idea towards getting more programs up to get more people off the street. And that is the funding mechanism, not in its entirety, but by and large, it's fine. So it's a county program, but we have city funding, we have state funding, we have federal funding. Yes.
Are you full?
Oh my goodness, are we full? The question, are we full? Yeah, we'd be full about that. Full and then some. Yeah, we are, I mean, to be honest, I don't really want to be doing more shelter. The solution to all this is housing. There are only so many hours in the day, and I just struggle sometimes realizing that how much time I spend on shelter. At the same time, each night someone spends outdoors, more likely they're going to suffer trauma, if not some sort of horrible physical consequence. And the reason why I do that is because we're super full. So one component that is nice about these programs, and it's uncommon, which that I've referenced in here, it's uncommon for a lot of homeless services, is there's actually a local preference associated with them. So a subset, only 15%, but most of any, of people who are in the general area get priority for 50% of all our events for people living in the area. So we work with a bunch of the outreach providers, and a bunch up here, who historically had nowhere to send people. There have been actually very few resources in the north end. I mean, that's changed a lot in the last few years for people to go. And so we take people in off the street. Now, that said, we have a waiting list that is super long. It's not actually like, it's not a chronological list. We wait based on priorities. So somebody who's out on the street who's got a whole bunch of really serious needs would jump in the line with somebody who has no needs, because that's who we prioritize serving. So our ability to, like, you know, people ask, can we just go in and get a whole bunch of people out of the camp right around the corner?
That was my next question.
We did when we opened because we had a clean slate. Not entirely because we had to move the people from Renton, but we had a bunch of extra beds because it was starting fresh. And we actually did a ton of work with the Broadview encampment. So yeah, we got 16 people from the Broadview encampment. Did some outreaches in Canton on 96th in Aurora when this program opened up here at that point on Stone. And we got about 11 people from that in. The flip side of this new model is it's a really great model, and then people have a platform to be and settle and start future planning and thinking about what their next outcomes would be. You'd have actually studied how this model differed from congregate setting and just overwhelming possible. The downside is people don't leave. We used to have capacity in our shelter system because it was such a hard place to be. People would leave all the time, only to come back or live in shelters. That isn't happening anymore, which is wonderful for the people in it. Doesn't help as much for the people who are without. Randy and
Yeah, no, please, we talked about this just a little bit, but there is the Express. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, that's Mary Pilgrim Inn. I bet
That's called Mary Pilgrim.
she's alive and well, but that's not something she's that. She was this amazing nurse who worked in that old shelter I talked about with burden area people.
And that's full up now, huh?
So if people do leave, so we do have, so the idea of this model is people can stay as long as they need to, but it's not permanent. And the whole focus of our staff, it's staff 24 hours a day, in addition to 24-hour staff with on-site case management. The primary job is to find people a permanent place to live. Given the complexities of what our clients are dealing with, that often means helping people with mental care, behavioral health care, private benefits, work, all that stuff. There's also just not housing, that's why we're in this mess, so there's not exactly a pipeline. But people leave for housing, people leave because they end up leaving to the hospital, people just leave on their own board. And then when that happens, we fill those units through a process that prioritizes people here. The whole community too, it's not exclusively for the north end, to be honest, here, but yeah, so it's full basically every day, but there's always somebody right on the goes with somebody.
Is that a family center?
Single adults, it's a great question. The DSC, Downtown Emergency Service Center, was my DSC often. So fast, people always. Single adults. So we prioritize single adults. The homeless service system actually is relatively segmented between young people, families, and single adults. Single adults. And prioritizing people who are chronically homeless, that's a formal term, but that really just means people who've been homeless for a really long time and have really obvious challenges.
So men and women.
Yep. Both places, yep. There's some ability for couples, which is not common. That's nice. That's really nice.
One is how many beds are there in each one of those, and the other one is we have
Yep. Great question. So 135 beds at the Northgate facility and 100 Mary Pilgrim under the Holiday Inn. Yes, there's nursing at both, but actually full-on medical clinic at Mary Pilgrim, which partnership with Harborview. Harborview's been our partner at our old shelter. They followed us ever since. That's a partnership goes back 35 years. So we have on-site primary care at that location. We have nursing at both locations. If you know any nurses, let me know because workforce issues are very hard to hire. Especially here. Great. That's awesome. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. Corey.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm visually impaired.
No problem.
So I'm curious to know how the burden of homelessness in not only Seattle, but King County is shared and coordinated by the departments of hopefully public health and social and human services and just in the city of Seattle. I don't know if that's too big of a question.
No, it's a great one. You guys are.
But my concern is I know that you're working along with Plymouth Housing, Compass Housing, Bellwether Housing, Low Income Institute, or whatever, and Capitol Hill Housing, and so forth and so on. Seattle Housing. How is this all coordinated so that you're not just hurting cats?
Wonderful, man. Wonderful question. Well, yeah, I would best answer that.
In other words, is there a director? Is there somebody
Yes.
that you can speak to?
So two things I would say, that is a college seminar right there. I would say we work in parallel with all the organizations you named. We are not all the organizations listed, like Seattle Housing Authority, Bellwether, some of those are not necessarily part of the same umbrella. There's affordable housing, the housing we do, because ours is affordable and there's embedded services, which is different because it's a different target population. But without getting in the weeds, the answer to that is yes, there's a new regional authority who oversees this for the reasons you are hinting at, that it's totally segmented and not coordinated. That is called the King County Regional Homeless Authority. They are 3 years old now. That is a joint effort between Seattle and the King County suburban jurisdictions and the county itself to jointly fund, basically take the money they were previously contracting out to an organization, give it all to this new entity called the King County Regional Homeless Authority, and then have them both contract out, but then also in theory design one central strategy for homelessness. I think it's an improvement. It's a little, there's a long way to go. They're fairly new. In terms of another piece of coordination is that all of our housing units, so not these emergency housing units, that's the distinction, which we use all shelter, but all emergency housing units. But housing, the permanent housing, people sign leases, that program that we have 15 of those, two of these emergency housing programs, there's half of them. That's managed centrally also by the regional health authority through something called coordinated entry, meaning that I don't just get to decide who to my programs. A central governing body identifies people and refers them to me, to my programs. They have to meet eligibility, which is basically just having very little amount of money and almost for a really long time. But other than that, that's how it's centrally managed. The idea that people experiencing homelessness don't have to know where to go, what paperwork to fill out, or rather one central one-stop shop. It's a great idea. Don't see the details. Lots to work out. Could go on and on. It's a wonderful question, but I think those are two.
It's a work in progress.
Of course. Yes.
So, a lot of concern. For offered housing.
Good question. The most, yeah, sorry, the question, see a lot of people sleeping out, tents or no tents, I assume. And how many people have offered housing except what percent? My experience and the data supports darn near 100, actually 96% was the most recent point in time study. So pandemic blew all this up, and we used to literally go out and count people every once a year, every night, almost one night every year. And one of the questions was if we are to be a safe place to go, it's kind of cool. Except safe housing to go to. That's where you hear a lot in the news, where you hear a lot of people turn it down if they are offered a shelter bed, and they turn those down a much higher percentage. I don't know what that actually is. I think it's substantially high, it might be a majority. In part for a few reasons. I think many shelters are not designed anywhere like what we're trying to design here. And not only are they mats on the floor, they may require a whole bunch of rules that people are just not in places to abide to. And I make it sound like people don't want to follow rules. They often have to give up some of the other social supports that they've been able to maintain to mean they don't get to stay in the apartment. And they have to get rid of a bunch of concessions because there's no storage. If they have a pet, they make their pet. Things that, whatever you think about that, it's causing people to say no because they're making decisions that's for them in that moment. We've tried to design shelters that accommodate that stuff, and we've been successful. We have one that is older, it's called the Navigation Center. Is designed for exactly that in candles, otherwise don't be candles, and it's rarely that people turn it down, which is good. The problem is it's serves 75 people with these and 200 people in that whole model. Acceptance, creating a program. So you got to right size stuff. It's a good question. It's complicated.
So are you responsible for the sidewalks like the first one? Right now, we're doing one.
That giant RV.
The RVs are blocking the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Which ties in, it seems like they have more say than taxpayers and or disabled people that can't even walk down the street. And that's the same way with up here. Block the sidewalk.
My office is on 3rd James Prentice Road, and same thing, they're in our door. That we are constantly trying to work on. Short answer is no, I don't have any power over that any other community member doesn't. So people, camping is not illegal unless you're blocking a sidewalk. I can't do anything about it. The RV in front of that Northwood place is a problem for us. We're concerned that they're preying on some of the people there. So we are actively working on one of the rules we have. It's an obligation of all of our staff to be keeping an active eye on the whole perimeter all the time and trying to make sure things are safe. For any kind of like entrenched issues like that, we work with local police, which we don't have any special leeway on. We also have a neighborhood coordinator role job, and it's trying to engage and move that. So the short answer is yes, we see ourselves as being responsible. I don't have a whole lot of different tools than anybody else. And so we can feel powerless at times about that. Unless people are blocking the sidewalk, I'd say they're committing a crime, but honestly, we don't respond to many crimes.
They're overwhelmed.
Yeah, not passive judgment, not passive judgment. That's, I mean, we've had Pioneer Square's had 3 shootings in the last 3 weeks, and we were walking with the captain just yesterday, and just painting a picture of, we get it, we know. Their hands aren't tied; they don't have resources to be out there when they want to be. So it's tired.
Well, what seems to be happening around here is that as you open more shelters, more and more slimy people are moving into the area. I mean, just flat out, crooks, car prowlers, and,
I would, I mean, I just don't want to know your experience on that. I would push the people that we serve, two things. The people that we serve are not in a position to car prowl. They're dealing with some pretty major challenges in their life and are not organized. That wouldn't be who we want to serve. And two, you don't get access to our program via proximity, aside from this 15% thing. And that has nothing to do with how close you are, it's how high needs you are. So with all of our programs are referral only, so you can't like walk up and get services intentionally so that we don't create a scene out front where people are congregating all around the front door in order to access a program for the very reason you're highlighting.
yeah, that's not my point is that tracking all this other elements that are still intense that are, it's not the people necessarily within your program, but it's attracting more tents, more people that aren't necessarily with the best of intent.
I would respectfully disagree on that, and only in that I have programs in the entire city, and there are more tents in every aspect of every component of the city. I mean, I've been in Boulder recently, maybe they figured something out for all sorts of reasons.
Magnolia doesn't have any housing like this. Right?
Well, I would also, there might be a little more political sway in some parts of the city than others.
Well, that's just it. That's what I'm afraid of in this area. There's not any political sway, and
Yeah.
so on. So it's come here.
I
Lake
guess-
City apparently is. I just was reading. They cleaned up Lake City completely now. And some of those people are coming.
Well, that I totally agree with. And so the conversation around sweeps is a really hot topic. We're not involved in that as an organization. I don't think it's acceptable for people to live in tents on the street either. I also don't think squeezing the proverbial balloon and moving people where there's nowhere for them to go. So that's exactly what happens to us. The Woodland sweep that happened 6-7 months ago, immediately a huge encampment popped up near one of our buildings. We don't know any of the folks, but they've been pushed where they previously were. And people are offered shelter, in many cases nominally would be my sense on that, and that it's a mat on the floor and they're staying instead with the service and the support network they have. And there's going to other parts of the city. That is totally true. I would push that someone having a tent near one of our programs gains nothing by us being in proximity. We don't provide services to people who are in the program. So if there's a perception that if they're near us, they're going to get something out of it, it's a false one on their part. So I don't want to dismiss that there are definitely more tents around here. I think the correlation might not be causation on them, from my experience. And I'm looking at you guys are an awesome group. I will come back anytime and dig into all this. We're getting beyond ESC, private homelessness, and I love talking about this. I truly have like 3 minutes. And
Yeah, somebody else.
How many tiny homes are building there, and when will the construction be complete?
We're not doing the tiny homes. That's a different organization. Mostly I think it's like Lehigh was in charge of the tiny homes. I know there is a plan. I couldn't answer that question. That's not something ESC does. Our clients tend to not be great in that model, so we're not involved.
So where is the shelter? Is the shelter with single occupancy that you're looking at all the time?
Done and built. That's why I'm coming back around, because I said I wanted to keep chatting with everybody. So if you haven't noticed us, that's a good sign, because we've been here for a minute. We've been here for a year up the street, and just on 130th, we've been here for 5 months.
130 and what?
Stone. So right from the old cash here.
Okay.
Extended stay. That's us now.
So first of all, thanks for the work that you do, because it's a terrible problem for everybody. My question is, are there any policy proposals, ideas, or people that you think deserve support, that are pushing through the whack-a-mole problem? Not really solving politics or doing things in a systemic way that's actually solving the problem.
Yeah, I'm gonna put hand on that one. That's a great question. And yeah, again, I really am sorry. I would love to stay for a longer time.
Who can we call to support?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, feel like I can endorse. Okay, we're moving in the right direction. I will say, so there, in my career, I've been privileged enough to have done this for 18 years. And I've been in an administrative role for a while now. I used to have to convince people that housing was a solution to homelessness all the time. That's why I'd be out there saying, and we're actually there, so what's old is new is back again. Some of this is not a housing issue, it's a drug treatment issue, making people get treatment. This city has, this is our 4th iteration of kind of a public policy debate around that. Drugs have changed, but the argument hasn't. Alcohol, but there's a great book written about the 60s, about this. That is there. And so I really have a lot of support for the county's efforts. I mean, the county's really leading on this and is taking a lot of heat in different suburban jurisdictions. Seattle definitely has historically done it by far its unfair share of responding to homelessness. Homelessness is a regional problem. And Seattle has been, by and large, one of the only, if not at times, the only jurisdiction willing to cite programs without really major political fights. This move to regional authority, to Corey's question, is one idea of getting around that, to bring suburban jurisdictions on board. Got a long way to go. So I think that is something really to support. So looking at the county's efforts. King County Regional Homeless Authority is that entity. Mark Jones is the CEO. They're really impressive and really great vision, really trying to center race equity and all of that. I think we've lost sight of that over the years. We have certainly not centered that over the years, understanding how systemic racism has contributed to homelessness. I think we focus a lot on behavioral health and not necessarily that component too. So he's doing a good job with that. Housing, this is the housing issue. There have been very notoriously not liberal leading organizations, including McKinsey & Company, who have assessed that this is actually literally a supply and demand issue around housing that skews people to its resources the most and squeezes them the most. And that truly is our issue. There are invariably cases, on the margins, and definitely having risk factors like a mental illness, living in poverty, and living in substance issue makes it more likely that an individual might fall into homelessness. But in terms of what's driving the rate of homelessness, it's housing affordability, housing. So at the end of the day, it's rather simple. Yeah, last one, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I can sort of understand how this would be help folks really stabilize with the,
Yeah.
The new kind of single occupancy room, more privacy, etc. Do you find that this is helping, like it's raising the percentage of people that are able to get and keep a job?
Well, good question. I thought you were going to ask about housing, find housing. I couldn't speak to that all that well, only because we really prioritize people who the path to a job is long and winding. Other metrics, though, the likelihood that somebody starts engaging in healthcare services, starts working with their case manager, starts finds housing, yes, and that's what UW studied. UW studied that because we weren't the only organization that did this, and so they actually did a study to kind of produce some outcomes that showed people are more likely to engage in care, people were more likely to leave the program to a permanent destination, whereas before they were. And then this other kind of harder, more intangible dynamic, people talked about feelings of well-being that they said changed overnight. So yes, those are a bit anecdotal. I think the hard numbers will come over time as this becomes stable models. Okay, my wife / babysitter they're different people. That sounded wrong. Will kill me if I miss my ferry. I live very far away. I used to actually live right in Greenwood in Sacramento. I love this neighborhood, but I'd buy a house.
Well, thanks for speaking with us.
Hey, I love talking about this work, and thank you for being such a great.
Before you leave, I got to say, no, thank you so
Hey,
much.
anytime. That's fun.
I mean, we'll invite you back and
Yeah.
get an update.
Anytime. Thank you.
November?
I'm gonna just say a couple things. We have game night coming up, and that is on October 15th. That's Saturday. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. They put a huge array out of games. We have ping pong too.
Sometimes,
Start
yeah.
at 4, especially for the families and big kids. So great. Start at 4, and play till 8, something like that. And that's that. Game night. And let's not forget the trunk or treat. Now that's for kids. Drive up. near Halloween, let's see, what date is that? That is actually.
The 29th of October, Saturday.
Couldn't hear.
Saturday, October 29th.
Yeah, okay.
We don't have hours yet.